This video is about designing your course assessment plan. So within this video, we'll be looking at the different forms of assessment. We'll also be looking at how to sequence assessment and then create your assessment plan for your course. So when we're talking about assessment, we're really looking at the process of forming a judgment about the quality and extent of a learner's achievement or performance. And therefore, we can then make an inference about the learning that's actually happened. So assessment inevitably shapes the learning that takes place. And this is one of the key aims of assessment, is promoting student learning through feedback. And we do this by providing feedback that's clear, informative, timely and relevant. So some of the other aims of assessment though are evaluating the effectiveness of the teaching process and facilitating continual improvement and enhancement of our teaching and our courses, the curriculum within those courses, and then for formal certification of achievements within for particular things, for example, an industry body. So assessment practices within the university are based on the general principles of criteria-based assessment. And these are that the desired learning outcomes for a course are really closely specified and that the assessment tasks are designed to indicate the progress towards these desired learning outcomes. And the assessment grade at the end is really a measure of the extent to which the learning outcomes have been achieved. We can think about this when we're looking at constructive alignment. So we've already got our learning outcomes. The assessment is really there to look at how close are the students getting to achieving the learning outcomes. And then we do this process before we actually start planning our teaching and learning activities. So we're setting up ourselves ready so that we can see the extent of student learning within the course. So there's a variety of methods that can be used for assessment, and the key criterion for choice among the methods should really be the appropriateness of to the learning outcomes. We also use criteria-based rather than norm-referenced assessment, and we can include individual or collaborative achievement, or both. The requirements for the learner's success should be made clear, and the overall strategy should be there to develop students to actually evaluate their own work, the quality of their own work. So this is the assessment for learning that we've been talking about. So there are three main forms of assessment, and really we always want to be focusing on the student's learning. So the three main forms are diagnostic assessment, formative assessment and summative assessment. And we'll be going to these in a little bit more detail now. So diagnostic assessment is all about that early evaluation of a learner's knowledge and skills in a particular area. So it diagnoses their strengths and their weaknesses and what their learning needs may be. And usually it doesn't contribute to a grade. So for example, you might have a self-assessment tool, a checklist, a quiz or a concept paper that the student has to write to demonstrate what's their prior knowledge, what is their understandings of particular concepts or skills. When we're looking at formative assessment, and this is very much looking at assessment for learning, so the focus here is about the process of learning, and it informs the progress towards the desired learning outcomes. So in other words, we know what we want our students to achieve by the end, and they know what they have to achieve with high quality learning. So how close are they getting towards that outcome? So it identifies as well in the feedback areas of strengths and areas where they can improve. Usually it is low stakes, so it either doesn't count towards a grade or it's very low stakes, so 5, maybe up to 15% of the grade. Ideally, it does reflect the summative tasks in style and level of difficulty. So they're doing a task, it's almost like a practice task that they're doing for a summative piece down the track. And it involves feedback from peers, a teacher or a tutor, or themselves. So really reflecting on what they're doing. And the third form is summative assessment. And usually, or some people do talk about this as being assessment of the learning. So it usually ends up being the assessment that we do at the end of a learning cycle, whether that's partway through a course or to sort of look at how students are progressing to a certain point, and then towards the end of a course we do another point where it's a summative piece, shows progress. So we have to then look at the idea of assessment in this case being reliable, valid and free of bias. So reliability is the degree to which an assessment tool produces stable and consistent results over time. And also, when we're talking about validity, it refers to how well an assessment measures what it is meant to be measuring. The other thing is that we want these results to be used to form a judgment about a student's level of achievement or the grade. So this is very much looking at assessment of the learning. And we call it high stakes because it actually goes towards their grade. You can see here that I provided for you different kinds of assessment tasks that go with the different forms. So for example, diagnostic is, or what do you know? You could use a quiz or a survey, observations, you can use inventories and so on. And this is really looking at what does the student know. Formative though is looking at, once again, you could use a quiz or a test, you could do a portfolio, observations, you can do questioning or reflective journal. All of these things you can use these to provide feedback to your students. So what are your students learning, and actually giving them the feedback about how they're progressing towards meeting those desired learning outcomes. And then the last one is summative, and we've got there, for example, you can use a test or an exam, you could use portfolio, a presentation, you can use a product of some form, even a performance, and so on. So these are things, is what have you actually learnt now that you've gone through that learning cycle, through the course or through a particular module and so on. So it seems, it identifies for the students and for the people that are marking the assessment, how close have the students got to the desired learning outcomes. Another word that you may be hearing as well is about authentic assessment, and where it is here, as you can see, it's a couple of quotes that identify that students do need to, in these times, gain access to knowledge and skills that will underpin their ability to learn and perform as informed citizens that are adequate to the challenges of a 21st century lifestyle. So in other words, we're looking at tasks, assessment tasks, that align with enabling our students to develop those knowledge and skills for performing either processes or performing tasks that then align to when they're out there as a professional in the world, in the real world. So these are the kinds of tasks that we're looking at. So they need to represent the knowledge that is authentic to real life, and it reflects the kind of understanding that requires an active demonstration of the knowledge in question. So tied to this is very much looking at a development across the program and a development across the course about how does the assessment link with employability, and how are we scaffolding our students throughout the course to then start thinking about their career, thinking about their profession and how it aligns with the real world, and also thinking about how are we supporting them in developing those graduate attributes that are so important. So when it comes to designing your course assessment plan, keep a few things in mind. Remember that student learning is gradual and cumulative, with qualitative changes taking place throughout the process. So for this reason, the assessment plan for a course should include the different forms of assessment to support student learning. So keep in mind as well, conveners of first year undergraduate courses and program directors really be guided in the development of your assessment plans by the standards of first year assessment and the assessment policies. So a few key things from these documents is that assessment tasks align with the course learning outcomes, that you do have diagnostic, formative and summative forms considered in your plan, that the tasks are appropriate for the level of students. So a first year assessment task is not going to be appropriate for a third year if the students are needing to go on placement, for example. That they're varied in type, so see the assessment types document if you're needing some further assistance with that. Remember that they have to be relevant, valid and fair, as authentic as possible, and remember to map them to the Griffith graduate attributes. Other things to consider is that when you're planning, when you're doing your assessment plan, really the summary provides information about both the formative and the summative aspects of your assessment. So when you're looking at that, make sure that you include that as well as looking at the different type, so specifying the exact type, the number of assessment items, the weighting, the due date and the assessment and marking criteria for each. Remember as well that no course grade is to be determined solely by using a single summative item or a single form of assessment. And assessment should be spread out across the teaching period. So whether that's an intensive course or whether it's actually a standard trimester. And lastly, the assessment plan should specify how individual assessment tasks are being conducted. So what is their mode? And it outlines the relationship between the purpose of the assessment task and the intended learning outcomes. So it should see a very clear mapping to those course learning outcomes. So this little diagram here shows you, or this table gives you an indication of the kinds of things that you will have in your assessment plan, things that you can consider. And you would firstly identify the course learning outcome that is aligned to this particular piece of assessment. What are the different forms, so diagnostic, formative and summative? What is the assessment type? So is it an examination? Is it a written assignment? Is it an observation? Is it a performance? What is the assessment detail? So what is the percentage? What's the mode and what is the criteria? And then lastly, start thinking about what's the timing? So what week and when are the dates across your teaching period? Once you've got all that information, you can actually start then creating a sequence. And here we've given you another grid that shows you could have your assessment tasks on the left there, and it has a standard trimester here in teaching weeks, but you'd have to adjust that to your teaching period. A standard trimester here. We've highlighted the first 4 weeks because they're really key for first year courses and making sure we have that early piece of assessment to enable academic recovery for students within those first 4 weeks. So an early piece of assessment there is always valuable. So we'd recommend a diagnostic piece and a formative piece within that time. And then over to the right there on the table, you can see that there's what's the alignment to the course learning outcomes, to always just keep that in mind. So we hope this has helped you with designing your course assessment plan, and all the best.